Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. I'm your guest host, Leigh-Ann Treece. I am a social worker in Music City and Josh's wife. Every week, Josh has a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker in the theater to talk about a movie that they've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. Since today is the last episode of Therapist Theater, I'm taking over hosting duties. Today, I'm interviewing Josh about a movie he loves and what he thinks it shows about mental health and relationships. Josh is a therapist in Nashville. He specializes in helping people pursue actively connecting with their self and others. A lot of his clients need that in their quest to overcome sex addiction. In addition to his work with clients, he's passionate about helping people understand their inner world by connecting mental health with things that are easily accessible, like books, movies, and relationships. This show is a great example of that passion come to life. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you head over to YouTube and search Therapist Theater and subscribe so you can follow the show's new adventures there. Oh, and make sure you tell your friends. You can also stay connected with what's happening in the theater by following us on social media. Links to all of our accounts are in the show notes. And so, for the last time, dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. So let's just get started. I'd love to first ask you, what was your impression of therapy before you studied it and became a therapist?
The earliest thing I can remember thinking about it was, and I've said this a million times on the show before, based off of television and movies, pretty much like Frasier Crane on... Frasier, not even Cheers, like Frasier. I remember watching Cheers, but not enough to where I could track, like, what he did other than saying he was a therapist. And then once he got onto the show Frasier, my impression was, because he was a radio host doing like a call-in show at that point, my impression was therapy was like giving advice. Like, you talked to somebody who knew more than you. You told them your problems, and then they said, this is how you fix them. And then you did the thing. And it was a lot like, this wasn't something that I got from that show. It was just something I imagined. It was a lot like high school in that there was a fixed amount of time you did it. And you finished your fixing your life within a certain within that fixed amount of time, and then once you got done with that, you like graduated and you were fixed.
That sounds great.
Right? Yeah. So like that was my understanding of it that I got from like television. The only personal connection-ish, because I can't even say it's a full connection, that I had to it was after my parents split up, which happened, it took a while, but between when I was like 14 and like 18, while that was going on, I was also being a teenage boy with all of the things, changes and hormones and all of that going on. And so I already had a bunch of jumbled up insides. And then like when Dad left, I didn't have a way of understanding any of those jumbled up insides. And so I just kept trying to hold it all in, but sometimes stuff would like bust through the seams. And so my mom just doing the best that she could, I remember at some point asking, I know my uncle, but maybe one of our youth pastors, to quote unquote talk to me. And my uncle, when he talked to me, just said, your mom says you're being an asshole. You just need to stop.
Easy.
Yeah,
just
I know,
like
right?
your concept of therapy.
It's a one-step process. It's a one-step process.
Just stop it.
But I can't remember if he said this or if somebody else said it in conjunction. But I got the maybe you should talk to somebody kind of thing. And because I didn't have any kind of framework about people that I knew, loved, respected, having gone to therapy, and I just had what I saw off of TV and movies and stuff, I thought therapists were psychologists or psychiatrists that wear white coats that treat really messed up people. Like it's, somebody that comes in as a part of a Law and Order episode. It's somebody that comes in Seven with Brad Pitt and Morgan, like to help understand this, terrible person. So to me, when somebody said to me as a teenage boy who didn't have a handle on his thoughts and emotions, maybe you should talk to somebody, I thought they were saying to me, you're messed up, you're broken.
Yeah.
And so I automatically rejected it and would not hear anything said after somebody. Maybe you should talk to somebody, ears off.
Interesting.
Because I thought they were saying that you're messed up.
Yeah, of course. Which, maybe you should talk to someone, or I think it'd be helpful to talk to someone. I mean, that's something that I've said before to anybody in life, because I do think therapy is so helpful, but it's interesting to hear the perspective of somebody hearing that. It's a scary thing. And what does that mean? Like when we tell people, oh, maybe it'd be helpful to talk to someone,
I think there's also an element of it that feels dismissive.
Yeah.
Because it feels like a handoff, like
I don't know what to do with this.
I don't know what to do with it. I'm done with you. So let me hand you off to somebody else, which I don't think anybody's saying that. That's what they mean. They may be saying, I don't feel equipped.
Right.
But I think I don't know or I don't feel equipped is okay when you can also say it while leaning in.
But I think it'd be nice to think of, and maybe this is something, we can brainstorm off the air. But like, what's something that people can say that might give a little bit more context, information, support, connection than just saying, oh, I think it'd be really helpful if you talk to someone. Because I think, just to your point, if you never know what people's concept of therapy is.
Right.
And so saying, oh, I think it'd be helpful for you to talk to someone, you're not adding in any information. You're not adding in. And for me, the only times that I've said it, it's been coming from a place of, this was helpful for me. Well, I can imagine it would be helpful for you.
I think that's the key, though, is I think when you attach it to story, when you attach it to your story, all of a sudden, because just saying, at least the way that I perceived it when somebody was saying it to me, you should talk to somebody, you ought, however they said it, it feels very positional. Like it feels very hierarchical. And so if that would have been changed to, hey, there was a time in my life where it felt really chaotic and I didn't know how to deal with it. And so for me, it was really helpful to talk to somebody that could help me figure out ways to deal with my thoughts and emotions. And in the process of doing that, I felt like things became more manageable. I think all of a sudden you're not coming from a top-down position. You're coming from an aligned side-to-side position. You're saying, I've done this.
Right.
Join me in the club, rather than, hey, go over there to that other club that I'm not a part of, but that you, and by the way, this is all based on my perception as a whatever teenage year that I was. But I think there's like this basic human pull to want to be a part, to want to be included. And whenever we feel disconnected, all of these alarms and stuff go off inside of us, and we respond in ways that are motivated by self-protection because we feel like we're losing a giant, I don't know about coping strategy, but like just a giant part of who we are, and that's inclusion in with a group.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that if you've got a therapy story, not telling the whole thing, but just telling that it's been helpful to me, it could be helpful to you. And if not, just, I think even admitting, hey, this is way above what I know, but I love you so much. What if we explored what it might look like
to talk to
somebody?
someone? Well, and that's something that I was going to say too, is like a question. Maybe you don't have a therapy story or you don't want to share it, regardless of who the person is, but turning it into a question somehow. Like, what do you think it'd be like to talk to someone who maybe specializes in this thing that you're struggling with, or who has been through this before? I mean, fill in the blank, but
yeah,
that way, just talking through it. Because I think, to me, hearing you talk about what therapy, your concept of therapy as a kid, I just think when somebody said to you, you should talk to someone, all they were doing was I guess feeding into or going off of the concept of therapy you already had. There was no added level of information or brainstorming or thinking through what it would actually be like, which I think would have helped you get closer to, oh, maybe that would be helpful for you to make that decision for yourself, rather than somebody just saying to you, well, you should do this.
There is something to be said about, like, since I was so young at the time, could I make a decision like that myself? I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know.
But if someone had asked you,
right. And I think myself at that age, and for a lot of my life, felt disconnected in general. Mm-hmm. So then, as a form of, like, maybe confirmation bias or something like that, to have somebody talk to me and me receive a message, even if they didn't try to send the message out, that, like, oh, the way you are doesn't work, doesn't fit in, you should go talk to somebody, to get was fixed, like it was like a touching a raw spot anyway. Yeah.
It seems like another metaphor that I thought of, because you love metaphors, is it seems like your concept of therapy was a little bit vending machine-ish. Like, you go to someone, you push a button, you say the things, and you get the answers. You kind of talked about, like, they give you answers they give you advice on what to do, and then you're fixed and it's done. And that, sort of sounds like that to me.
I think so. Yeah.
Well, that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, now you are a therapist. We're talking about all these things that you pictured therapy as, and now it's what you do. So
talk about a flash forward.
I know. Why therapy? Like, how did you get here?
So the place in my life that I was just talking about, high school, teen years, Dad had left. It was just my mom and brother and I. And, I think that the motto, and I have said this to so many clients, I've said it to so many podcast guests, and if we ever get like a family crest for our family that we have together, it may go on that. But just the motto of, I'm doing my best, I think could have applied to our family back then, Mom and my brother and I.
Why don't we have a family crest also? We need to get on that.
I know, right? It's just going to be 4 pictures of the dog, like in.
And then I'm doing my best. I love it.
We were all trying to stay above water. And I think because of that, I felt for the most part like I was trying to figure things out myself, but didn't know what I was trying to figure out.
Boy.
So, I mean, I felt really, like, lost. And I felt really, I guess, directionless. I'm not really sure. So the place that I felt the most connected at was my church. And a lot of that was just because I felt seen by a few key people. And I didn't feel seen in a lot of places. And so when I graduated high school, I went to a Bible college to become a youth minister. And I worked in churches doing that for 10 and a half, 11 years. And looking back now, there was a lot of it that I did, quote unquote, feel a calling to, but there was even more of it that I felt like this was a job, a career in which a person who had it made me feel seen and cared about when I needed it the most. And so I wanted to do that for other kids. Mm-hmm. And so I worked a lot with middle schoolers and was able to do that. But being in that job while still feeling disconnected didn't really work. I remember being in the church that I worked at in San Diego and calling up my mentor, Dr. David Olshine, and asking him one time, like, hey, can we have a conversation sometime about work ethic? Because I feel like I know all of this stuff I need to be doing, but I just find myself wasting time so much. And I remember him asking me, like, are you sure this is what you think you should be doing? Like, that you're called or something like that? Yeah, absolutely. The times that I felt most fulfilled in the job were times that I was able to sit with small groups of people rather than that job is so tough because it's not just one job. It's filled with a million jobs. You got to be a party planner. You got to be
a performer.
A performer. You got to be a speaker. You got to be an organizer. You got to be a peacemaker. You got to be a translator. I mean, there's
an accountant.
Yeah. And like, we didn't get taught any of that stuff in college. And so, you know, the times that I felt like I could connect with people in a smaller setting were the times I felt most fulfilled. But being disconnected, when I say that, I mean like I was disconnected from others, but I was also disconnected from myself because I never learned how to do that. And that disconnection from myself in a big way meant I didn't know how to access my emotions, process my emotions, and choose actions that were productive based on my emotions. So like when I came into conflict with my boss, I did what was natural to me, which was avoidance. So like I would avoid him. I would try to get in after he got in and slip into my office and close the door. I would try to talk to him as little as I could because I think I felt hurt. I did feel scared and I felt lonely because and without being able to identify those things and process them, I just didn't know how to interact. And so by doing that avoidance thing, it eventually led to me getting fired. And naturally so. I was 27 at the time, 28 maybe, and I had this existential crisis because so much of my identity for a decade had been built around being a youth minister. So that when I all of a sudden wasn't that anymore, the question I had wasn't what do I do now? It was who am I now?
Yeah.
And on top of that, because my entire community was at this place that I'd just gotten fired from, I was now disconnected from the other people in my life, as well as still being disconnected from myself. So this was like early 2008. And around that time, a girl I was dating broke up with me. So like,
sheesh.
I know, right? So like February of 2008, I just went into a total tailspin depression and was alone in my apartment, did not shave or put on pants for like 4 or 5 days at a time.
Kind of like quarantine.
Senior portrait style. But just got, I was just actually depressed.
Yeah.
And afterwards, towards the end of February, I just decided this doesn't work for me anymore. So I started driving a county up and volunteering at the church that I had been at before, the church I'd just gotten fired from, on the weekends. And those weekend trips became week-long trips. And eventually I just went back up there. And then eventually, because I couldn't secure a job, because this is 2008 and the economy is just in the toilet, I ended up going back home to South Carolina. So being back in South Carolina, this is the longest Y therapy ever.
Well, no, because hold on really quick, because I do want to just like note a couple things that I feel like I've heard.
Yeah.
When you talked about being a teenager and being, you used the word lost, and you were kind of, you said directionless and lost, which are kind of the same things. And then it seems like the wording switched to disconnected. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if it just sounds to me like you can kind of pinpoint that early phase in your life when you were a teenager. And maybe I'm jumping here, but it sounds like disconnection was probably what you felt like from yourself and from others. And then the place where you found it was church. Yeah. And so you stayed there, understandably so. Like that's where your needs were getting met. And then I think something that you're talking about speaks to probably anybody who's worked at a church before, which is one of the reasons why it can be so challenging. It's not just what you do. It becomes your life. It becomes who you are. And then not only that, but, a lot of what church provides to people is community support and, a sense of purpose. And so it makes sense that when you got fired, it's not just that you lost a job, but you still had your community. You still had your purpose. You were able to kind of connect to this tether in your life. You lost all of that. Like in losing your job, you lose... I'm not going to say everything because, you don't lose everything. But I think when that one place is all of those things for you. Right.
If you're anchored in a bunch of different places and one of them becomes unanchored, you still have other places to lean on. But in this case, all my anchors were
at one place. Yeah. So it just makes sense. And I also just think that word disconnection, like I've just heard you say that, you had a place where you did find connection, but you felt disconnection. You were disconnected from yourself. Mm-hmm. And then when you lost that job, it was like losing all of those tethers that you have. Yeah. So, okay. So now you're in South Carolina. You've come back to South Carolina.
And not by choice. It was really like because I couldn't find a job and I ran out of money. And so I just had to come back. And so, being back in South Carolina, moving back in with my mom and brother.
At what age now?
28.
Yeah. That's tough.
It was tough because I felt like I had started the growing up process and it felt like I came back feeling like a failure, so, and by the way, the words I'm going to say now, I can say looking back, I couldn't say at the time. I was filled with shame. I was filled with loneliness, and I didn't know how to feel those things. I didn't know how to deal with them. So for about a year, I kept trying to get another church job. Sometime in 2009, I got a job, I think working at Target. And around that time, my home church, which I had been going to again, said, "You want to come work here?" And I was like, yes, oh my gosh, I'm being issued my identity again.
Because that's the place you initially felt that was the connection.
Place. Yes, that was the place that I had felt seen at, which I've said to you before. The dream, the whole first career of my life was to work at my home church, and that wasn't because I thought it was the best I could do. It was because that's where it happened for me, and I wanted it to be a part of helping it happen for others. So I go work there, and what I found working there was, not only, and this whole time, I'm still the same person. I'm still disconnected from me. You can have the nicest sports car in the entire world with a flat tire, and if you put it on a tow truck and take it over to another state, you're not going to be able to drive it any better over there. It still has a flat tire. You haven't fixed the tire.
Right.
So it doesn't matter where you are. It's going to work the same way. So I was still disconnected from me. And so I ended up getting not fired, laid off from there. And right in and around the time that I was getting laid off, I came to the place where I realized my life wasn't working the way I wanted it to work. And so I had the idea that I should go talk to somebody. And, you know, I had Josh Peace on the show last year sometime, and I was able to tell him this conversation that you and I had back in 2008, wherein, you know, you said that you were going to counseling, and I was floored because I just respected you so much and didn't understand how can this person that I think has it all together be going to somebody that would signify that they don't, you know? And at this point in 2013, when I was kind of going, all right, my life's not working, what do I do? Like, that conversation with Josh Peace came back to my mind. So we're talking about 5 years.
Yeah.
I had this conversation 5 years later. I'm thinking about it. And so I start going to therapy. And in the process of going to therapy, I went into therapy thinking, I'm going to be talking about this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at some point, a couple of weeks in, going, we haven't talked about my one thing yet. And then a couple more weeks, we haven't talked about my one thing. And I don't remember a time where it switched to talking about the one thing, but I remember it starting to happen. And it was almost like, you know, setting up something over here in the top right, setting up something down here in the bottom right, setting up something up here in the top left, setting up something down here in the bottom left. And all of a sudden, boom, they're all connected. And we're talking about the one thing. And almost like it was some kind of magic show, you know. And so that church, my home church I was at, laid me off. And I thought to myself, well, I got to keep going to therapy. So I need to find a job that helps me continue to go to therapy, i.e. like has health insurance. And so I had heard about the health insurance at a local coffee shop called Starbucks. And I
support local business.
And so I got a job at Starbucks for the health insurance so I could keep going to therapy, which is also where we met.
Yep.
And in the process of going to therapy, I went into it still locked on to this. My identity was in my job as a youth minister.
Mm-hmm.
So listen, doc, fix me enough to where I can get back that. And as the therapeutic process moved forward, what I discovered was, because I was able to continue or learn how to connect with myself, my vice grip on that identity as my job thing loosened to where I was able to examine the things in me that I was starting to connect with and see what is it that I want to do and not what I think I should do. And around that time, 3 friends had asked me, hey, have you ever thought about therapy? And I said, I think about it all the time. I go every Tuesday. Like of course. And they were like, no, like you doing the thing. And I was like, no, come on. You gotta like have more degrees to do that than I have. And I stink at school. But, you know, a little bit of time passed, and I remember asking my therapist, hey, I think I want to do this. How do I do it?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, well, you got to go to school. And I was like, oi.
I'm out.
So, I mean, I just started down the road, and I only applied at 2 schools, one in St. Louis, one here in Nashville. When I went to interview at both places, I had a better experience at the one in St. Louis, but I already had people in Nashville that I loved and that were already such an important part of my story. And so I just wanted to come to a place where I already had people, because I thought change is really tough and it's made easier by the chance to be around people you care about. And so came to Nashville, went to grad school, finished up grad school, married the girl, and here I am.
Got the dog.
Got the dog.
Wow. Thanks for sharing all
So
that.
I guess why therapy gets summed up in, it was in therapy that I felt like I was finally able to connect with myself and make changes in my life that got me the life that I had always wanted.
And more.
And yeah, and include, yeah, the and more is like stuff that I would never even dreamed of that was beyond what I wanted into what I needed. And so because of that, in the same way that I entered into youth ministry thinking I was given from this, so I want to give to it, that led me to but except the big difference in this case was right now I'm connected to myself.
Yeah.
And this is coming from a a true self place instead of these guys that poured into me loved me, I want to be like them. Today, I want to be me. And by being me and doing this, I want to help other people.
Right. And you come alive when you do it. I mean, I can speak to that. And one last thing before we move on to the movie is you talked earlier about what you got from those guys at church. You know, you talked about how they made you feel seen. You felt seen when you didn't feel seen in a lot of other places in your life. And so you wanted to give that to other people. And when you said that, I wrote it down because I thought, oh, that's what you're doing. You still do that. You're doing that. Like, and just what you said, it's not because of you're just emulating people who you like and, you know, no idea what it means in you or what's going on in you, but you're doing it from a place of that's your true, I really don't want to use the word calling, and I got to think of a better word so you can like.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in the case of calling, what people mean a lot of times is this something outside of you beckoning you to do something. And while there may be an element of that, what I think in this case is something inside of me that I connected with is telling me this is, and I think that depending upon what like system worldview that you use, that could potentially be the same thing.
Totally.
But in this case, I feel much more connected now than I did back then.
And I think when you find something like that, you know, when you're connected with yourself, it's, I mean, I don't even want to say you're lucky, but it's when you're connected to yourself, you are able to know more what makes you come alive. And it seems like that's what you've found.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think there's so many more things that I could talk to you about, especially in relation to your story, because we're married and I love you and I'm really thankful for where your story brought you. But I'd love to talk about the movie that you brought. What movie did you bring?
Over the course of the past several months, like because of some work that I've been doing in me, kind of like getting back in touch and connecting with a past version of myself. And this movie was really significant to that past version. And it's The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Which in like preparation for watching it yesterday when we watched it, I guess, I saw that it only had 51% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it blew my mind because I was like, this is the perfect movie. What are you guys thinking? This is crazy. But yeah, Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
And you might have answered this a little bit already, but why that movie?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Leigh-Ann. So this is really this insight. It was something that only clicked together for me yesterday. And that was, this movie came out and I saw it in 2013, which is the year where I went to therapy. I started connecting to myself. I started making changes in my life that led me to feeling whole. Mm-hmm. And so this movie for me is like the seam in a book that marks the passage from one chapter to another chapter. And there's so many things in the movie that I can see that are just incredible conceptions of what I view my story as.
Yeah. Do you see yourself in the main character?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's talk about it then. I mean, I've got so many questions and so many times in that movie that I think I can see you in that main character. But I guess let's just kind of start from the beginning. So, Secret Life of Walter Mitty opens on a guy on a computer, and he is on eHarmony, right? It's
doing
eHarmony.
two things at the same time. He's on his eHarmony profile, on somebody else's profile,
Right.
and he's balancing his checkbook.
I didn't catch the balancing the checkbook
At the same
beginning.
time, yeah.
So you open on him. He just looks like a regular like business dude. Nothing
dressed
super...
a little Dwight Schrute-ish,
yeah,
like dress shirt, short sleeve dress shirt with a tie. Yeah.
And you see him click around on eHarmony. You see him go to this one person's page, and he goes to leave a wink. Mm-hmm. Which I don't know if that's a real eHarmony thing, but I'm assuming it's like a little nudge.
I did eHarmony back in the day before we met. And I'm struggling to remember. It was like, I might be getting it in Facebook mixed up, but I think that was a thing in the sense of it was the way on there you initially showed interest in somebody.
Okay.
So
Sorry.
Walter's doing that.
Walter's doing that, but I do want to say, like, when he's hovering over he doesn't actually send the wink. We got to say that. He doesn't actually send it.
Yeah, he's on this woman's page. He wants to wink at her.
And you see his finger hovering over the mouse.
At some point, he gets up and walks away and comes back. Yeah, he's really like debating, like racking his brain about whether this is something he wants to do.
Well, and I think anybody who's ever, messaged a crush or tried to initiate conversation can identify with that. Like, I thought they depicted that so well, where he's like, ooh, he just can't bring himself to click it. He clicks it and it doesn't go through. And so that kind of starts off a whole.
He finally makes the decision to do it, and it's one of these like error or something like that.
So he jumps over that hurdle. He reaches that frustration, and then I think we just see him go to work, right?
Yeah, so he packs up his briefcase, and then he heads out to work. And while he's on his way to the subway platform that's going to take him to work, he gets on his flip phone and calls up customer service at eHarmony to try to figure out, hey, he talks to the guy and says, hey, I'm trying to leave this wink, but it's not letting me. And then the guy starts up a conversation saying, oh, do you use eHarmony that much? And he's like, no, not really. He goes, yeah, because I can see your profile's not filled out.
It's empty.
You got to help me out. Like, this is really going to help you, get more response, And so it starts this running narrative conversation that runs throughout the movie with this eHarmony customer service rep named Todd. Then and there, because he's trying to figure out how to leave a wink.
Right. And Todd is trying to get him to fill out his profile.
Right.
He's like, where have you been? What have you done? Like, come on, like, we got to fill out some stuff.
Yeah. At one point, he asks him, there's like a category name where he says, noteworthy or mentionable places that you've been. And Walter says, I've never really been anywhere noteworthy or mentionable, Yeah. And then right about that time, there's this I don't know, structure of the movie. The whole deal with Walter Mitty is that Walter leaves reality, disconnects from reality, and goes into a fantasy world.
Which I will say, just to keep us on the timeline of the movie, I think we have seen him go to work at this point.
No.
We have, because we saw the girl on the eHarmony profile, and then he went to work and we saw her there, and he left into fantasy a couple times. Because that's how we came to understand that this girl is a girl who
that's actually coming up later while he's on the subway platform, and Todd is on the phone with him. Todd starts to say, hello, are you still there? Are you still there? And that's where he has his first fantasy, where he's got this intense look, and he runs off the bridge, jumps, goes through the window, saves a dog, runs out the bottom. the building explodes, and then the girl from work walks up to him and says, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you saved him. Thank you so much, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "Oh, just doing." And then he kind of like zooms out of the fantasy, and Todd's like, "Hey man, what happened? Are you still there?" And he's like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "Did you zone out or something?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I do that sometimes." And so not only do we get the introduction to the phone calls with Todd, but we get the introduction to the fantasies, and Todd knows the fantasies are going on, which is going to come up again later in the movie.
Right. Okay. Because then when he's on the phone, he says he starts running.
Yeah.
That's what we see
Yes.
as the audience. And then he goes into that fantasy. And then when he flips back to reality, you see that he was running and like he missed the subway.
Yes. Oh, and that's the other thing
Yeah.
that I really like about the movie is we don't get switches between reality and fantasy, because Walter doesn't, in his mind, switch. He just, it goes right into it. So yeah.
And typically what happens when there's a fantasy is you're watching as if it's just, this is how it's playing out.
Sure.
You're seeing whatever scene he's playing.
So
as
all
the
of a
movie.
sudden, this nerdy dude you think is like, Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible.
Uh-huh.
But he's still standing on the subway platform.
And then how we understand that it's a fantasy is it comes back to him and he is zoned out. And usually somebody is trying to talk to him, or there's something that he's missing.
Yes.
Because he's in fantasy.
He misses
world.
real life because he slips into fantasy.
Mm-hmm. So he shows up at work, he's talking to coworkers, whatever. We come to understand that something is changing at Life magazine where he works. He walks
as soon as he
Life
gets
magazine.
into the lobby, there's buzz. Like you can tell something's happening. Before he gets to go up the escalator, his sister is there. She is dressed like a pink lady from Grease, specifically Rizzo. I can't remember what she said, like tough but
tender, I think, or something like that.
And she's got a Clementine cake in her hand that their mom made because it's Walter's birthday.
Yep.
So she gives him the cake, and she says to him basically, like, "I need you to go over and help mom finish packing because she's moving." And he's like, "No, I'm literally on my way into work right now. I can't do that." And she says to him, "I don't think you're seeing this for what I need." And that was something that stuck with me a lot too, because I think at the place where Walter is right now, he is very disconnected from himself. He has connections with others. He is connected with his sister and his mom. He wants to be connected with this woman at work, but he's not. But he's not connected with himself. And when you're not connected with yourself and you have connections with others, you get stuck in this place of performance. You get stuck in this place of activity, of doing, because the choices you make and the things you do are based on what you think they want or expect of you. So nothing ends up being for you, and everything feels empty.
Right.
And so when she says, I don't think you're seeing this for what I need," she's catching him. This could be like 9 a.m. He's just come into the lobby of his job to go up the escalator to his office, and she's telling him, "I need you to leave to not be at work to go do this other thing so I can go audition for a play. I don't think you're seeing this for what I need." She's saying, and maybe, hey, because of the structure of the movie, maybe that's not what she said actually, but that's what he's hearing. But for whatever reason, he's hearing somebody say, "Give up you and attend to me," which, when you're not connected with yourself and nothing is for you, that's what everything feels like.
Yeah. Well, and I would even say, because he's not connected to himself, he can't really prioritize what's important enough to him to sacrifice. So, at that point, he has already heard from a coworker. I think I forget how they say it, they've been bought out. Or
the magazine was sold, or he works for Life magazine, which, if you're anywhere under the age of 30 or 35, you'll have no idea what that is. But it used to be an actual magazine that came out. Then it switched to an insert in the newspaper, and then it just died. But it was a photography magazine that was, I guess in a way, similar to National Geographic in that it was hey, here's the world. It's great. Go out there and see it.
Yeah. And so he's already heard this thing is happening. They're going to, there's a transition team, like there's stuff's happening upstairs. And that's when his sister comes to him. And one of the thoughts that I had was like, he's by the book. He comes across as a little bit of like a shell of a person. Like he doesn't have much personality, but he's got fantasies of what
Later
he
on
wants.
in the movie, Todd describes him as, I thought you'd be just like a gray sheet of paper.
That's a great description. But this, all of this is to say, when his sister, comes to him and says like, this thing is going on. I need you to do this. Yes, maybe that's not fair for her to ask, and he would have stayed at work. But I also think if he was connected to himself and there was something important going on, he'd be more able to make the decision of what's more important to me. Right. Is it, doing this thing for my sister? Is it work? But I think as it is, he kind of just is going through the motions, and he's been told that something at work is important. And so he's just like, no.
Which he does end up staying at work.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, so he stays at work and he goes up the elevator. And then the only thing I have to say about the elevator scene is that it is like social anxiety nightmare. Like you have the guy who's, I'm going to call him Ben. What's his actual name?
Ben from Parks and Rec.
It's Ben
his
from
name's
Parks and Rec.
Adam.
Adam Scott.
Adam Scott, yeah.
And he's like the business dude who's going to be in charge of transition, and he's like kind of a jerk. But when you first meet him, he's like asking people what they do, and Ben Stiller, what's his name in the movie?
Walter Mitty.
Oh yeah, Walter Mitty. Walter Mitty. Oh my gosh. Walter Mitty is like so awkward and frozen and whatever.
Which, let me just say, elevators are awkward for anybody. You're in a very small space. You've all signed on to a social contract to face in one direction and for no reason other than it's what's traditionally done. You're trying your best not to fart. Like, it's just an awkward situation all around. And so, at this point, Walter did just get to the office. He goes in the elevator. 3 guys in suits come in, and Adam Scott does start. He turns around. I don't remember if he introduces himself, but he carries himself with a sense of authority, and he's like asking people what they do. And he says something to Walter, and we have the second fantasy that happens. He just kind of slips into it, and he says something to him along the lines of like, hey, you know what a beard looks good on? Dumbledore, not you. He has this fantasy of telling this guy who he feels intimidated and insulted by, telling him off. And then when it snaps back into reality, it's the boss standing there going, hello, because he has dissociated again. Yeah. Which is really like, in Walter's case, it's not just slipping into fantasy. Like, at least in the sense of how we see other characters reacting to him when things kind of snap back in. It's almost like he's dissociating in the moment. Like he's leaving the moment as a self-protective measure, because when he slips into these fantasies, he has influence and effect over the world, whereas he feels like he doesn't in real life. And
it's very awkward.
It's very awkward.
It's so awkward.
Yeah. So they get up at the elevator, which at the top of the elevator or whatever, it's the 3 guys, the 3 business guys, and Adam Scott, and they're doing this all-staff standing meeting, basically saying, the magazine got bought. We're the ones that are going to manage the transition. We got one more issue to do. Here we go, everybody. And at some point, he sees who we find out her name is Cheryl, Kristen Wiig's character, kind of off to the side. So he goes up to start talking to her, and he slips into another fantasy where he is a Latin Arctic explorer, and he like steps to her from the Himalayas or something. He's covered in frost. He's got long hair, and he has a bad accent. And it's just this imagining that he is this person that she would be instantly attracted to.
Because he has just overheard her saying to her friend when they're talking about the weekend, what'd you do this weekend? She kind of makes a joke about like, what did she say? Something about like, got massaged by my Latin lover, like la.
And also the awkward thing happened where she's next to an elevator. He's like turned towards her. She waves, and he's like, "Oh, hey!" And somebody's walking up behind him that she's actually waving. It's
not him.
Yeah.
The whole sequence is just like
it's beautiful.
And a socially anxious person's nightmare.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah, so he has that third fantasy of being this person that she would be instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this point, you know, we're basically have met 4 or 5 characters that the movie follows. Walter Mitty, Ben Stiller, the main guy, the boss, whose name I can't remember, but Adam Scott, Cheryl, his object of affection, Todd, who's the customer service rep with eHarmony, and then now we find out about this legendary character named Sean O'Connell, who's played by Sean Penn. And because Life is a photography magazine, he is a photographer who he's been their like most famous photographer. They are relying on his pictures to put in the last issue. He sent a roll to them. It went to Walter, and he left a note that said something like, "Negative number 25 is my best work ever. It's the one I'm most proud of, and it represents the quintessence of life."
Right. And one of the things, too, that I think is important about this particular sequence is up to now, we've only seen, we're still trying to piece together who the heck Walter is and what his deal is. Like, we have seen him slip into a couple fantasies. We've gotten this idea that he's kind of like just going through the motions, like he might not be the most interesting guy. And then we're setting up now what he's done for his job. And so it becomes clear that he and this Sean character have corresponded over years and years. And this Sean character has sent him it's in a gift. He even says like he has this really nice letter to Walter.
It's like a roll of negatives, and there's a leather wallet that comes with it. And inside the wallet is, I don't know it's not printed. It's like when you press stuff into leather.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the motto of Life magazine.
Yeah, which is, I don't know it by heart, but it's something about adventure and, life.
I'm totally embarrassed I don't have it written down, but I don't.
We'll enter it into the show notes.
Yeah, but so Walter is a negative asset manager. Sean is the guy that takes the pictures from out in the world. He sends the negatives back to Walter. Walter and a partner that work down in a warehousey, basementy kind of officey thing, they manage all the negatives that the photos get printed from. Because it's a photography magazine, negatives are a big deal.
Right.
And this is back before digital photography was used at that magazine, because this is 2013 when it's taking place. So digital photography was around.
Right.
But basically he gets the roll of negatives, he makes them into a sheet, and he's looking at them, and he realizes negative number 25 is missing. That's the one, the best one that represents the quintessence of life. And so
that he wants on the cover. He has specifically said, this is the cover for the last publishing of the magazine. And
so this like standing meeting that has been happening, the boss that had been picking on him says, "Hey, we got a note from Sean too saying that that's the cover, so let me see it." And he's like, it's getting processed right now. We don't have it." And he said, "Next time I see you, I want that picture." And he's like, "Great." So now we've got the conflict that's going to be moving forward. Walter's got to find this negative and develop it before the boss sees him again. This is for the last issue of the magazine. And there was something when I was watching it yesterday, I was like, oh, a parallel. It's the last issue of the magazine, and this is the last episode of the show.
Aww.
That I kind of, so he goes to Cheryl because she is somebody that I think works in payroll. So what he's trying to do is figure out, you sent Sean a check. Where did you send it to so I can get in touch with him there? Because Sean doesn't have a phone. And she says, well, our practice is we send out several checks because we never know where he's going to be. So we just try to send it to 4 or 5 key locations, hoping that he'll be in one and he'll cash it. And around the time that she's telling him all this, he slips into his 4th fantasy, which is where they are somewhere near Rockefeller Plaza. They're near Rockefeller Plaza. They're near that place where there's the big gold statue in the middle of the ice skating. Yeah. And he's like, oh, by the way, look at this thing I did. And it's a giant gold statue of the two of them, like in robes, like whatever. And so they have a conversation. He goes back into the building, and he's going up the escalator, How did he get the Stretch Armstrong? I'm
Yeah,
trying to
so
remember that.
so I think we missed a couple things, and it's not super important, but I do want to say, like, the scene you're talking about where he goes into fantasy and he's like, look at what I made you.
Mm-hmm.
When he snaps back, you know how we always can tell that time has passed and people know. She was trying to get his attention and then said something about, like, probably boring you. Like, I'm probably boring you because of something. Because to be, like, at this point, there's been several conversations between them. She had to call someone to figure out, like, where the last check, there's been some back and forth. And so this is, like, a moment where she was trying to give him an update. And then she started talking about, I think, like, her kid or her life or something like that. And that's when he snapped out of it. And one of the things that I wrote down then is, like, he's been so interested in her, but he's there in the moment with her and he slips into fantasy.
Yeah.
So it's like his idealized, like, fantasy version of who she is and of what their relationship he wants it to be has taken him out of a moment where he could be getting to know her.
Yes. So that's the interesting thing about the way that Walter uses fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
The way that Walter uses it is he feels disconnected and dissatisfied with his life. He slips into fantasy so that he can have power, influence, affect, control over the world to get what he thinks will make his life satisfactory, that he thinks will make his life what he wants it to be. He's telling himself from the beginning of the movie that he wants connection with Cheryl. Mm-hmm. But when he gets to the moment, he doesn't actually want connection with Cheryl. He wants the idea that he has, that what connection will give him. He wants that idea fulfilled. Huh. So, like, in both the Latin Arctic lover fantasy and the statue fantasy, what he's wanting from her is adoration. He's wanting from her to see him and to fawn over him.
Right.
And so he's telling himself he wants connection, but that's not what the fantasy is.
Yeah.
And the fantasy, she is actually showing interest in him. Like, maybe not interest in him, but interest in him in the sense of a genuine conversation.
Yeah.
And instead of being able to be present and receive that and play off of that, he leaves the moment to enact this fantasy of adoration.
Right.
Because his idea of connection at that point is praise from somebody.
Right. And, you asked something about, like, when does the stretch, what's it called?
Stretch Armstrong is the doll, and I got lost where he got that from.
So I think that, because remember how I said there's been a couple back and forths. Like, he told Cheryl about his conflict. She said she was going to call so-and-so in payroll to help. So in between all of that, I think that we do have a scene where he's with his mom and sister, and that's when he gets it.
Yeah.
Because
it was something of his. Right. Yeah.
But I think I don't know where it happens in this sequence, if it's around the same time, because something that I wrote down is that I wonder when he turned off. Because when his sister and his mom are giving him this, and they're going through a box of
I think
his
it's a
old
box
stuff,
of his things because they're packing up his mom's place to move her.
Yes. But his sister says something about, like, oh, you used to love this. Like, they're talking about him, you used to have things that you loved and were interested. Yes.
Yeah.
And so it made me wonder, I wonder when he turned off. And then they mentioned something about his dad dying. And that for me was like an answer to my question of, like, oh, that happened and he stopped being a person.
And we get the full story of that later. So in that box is a Stretch Armstrong doll, which is once again like this thing from long ago, like the 80s, early 90s. Basically, it was a blonde-headed dude where his body was filled with this weird gel stuff that you could, like, pull on his arms and legs and stretch it out a couple feet, like, pretty far.
Yeah.
I have seen the inside of a Stretch Armstrong doll.
What's in it?
It's like clearish gel.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's weird.
Gross.
Don't eat it. Kids, don't eat it. But he exits this conversation with Cheryl back into an elevator where the boss is once again, and he starts picking on Walter, saying, I can't have a professional conversation with you while you're holding this Stretch Armstrong
This
doll. And it turns, he goes into fantasy again. This is his fourth fantasy. And it turns into this Marvel Comics level fight where
Big
him and the
time.
boss are like punching and kicking, and they knock each other out of the elevator, out of the building, onto the street. They fall. They knock loose pieces of concrete that one uses as a snowboard and one uses as skis. And they're both holding onto a side of Stretch Armstrong, and it's wrapping around a traffic pole or something, and they start spinning towards each other with fists raised in this epic encounter. And then all of a sudden it snaps back to the elevator. They've gotten to the floor, and the boss is literally binging him on the forehead. Earth to Major Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And, the boss just thinks of him as this guy that's totally a space cadet.
Which, to be fair, now I think Adam Scott's character is a jerk, but there were some moments where I was like, I don't know, his reactions are kind of fair to have this dude standing in front of him spacing out. Like, yeah, I do think he's a jerk. He goes too far, but...
He's a jerk, but if he as a boss says to an employee, hey, I need this thing from you next time I see you, and then he sees you, and as he's talking to you, you stare blankly ahead and...
and don't respond to him.
Yeah.
Like, yes.
Yeah. So, like, at this point, I wrote down, I wonder what the inciting incident is in the movie. What's the main drive for Walter? And I kind of saw these two parallel things happening. Okay. One was the last issue of the magazine is going to get put out, and there's 2 weeks until it happens.
Yes.
They got the role from the photographer that's going to have the cover on it, and the picture that's supposed to be on the cover is missing, so he's got to track down the picture. Mm-hmm. And then 2, he's on the phone with Todd from eHarmony, and he's trying to fill out his profile because they're thinking if he can get it filled out, he can finally leave a wink for Cheryl.
And might get some
interest. Yeah. So I wrote down that the drive or the mission to track down the picture is a very external motivator during the movie.
Yes.
And the desire to fill out the profile is a way to track what's going on inside of Walter.
Oh, I really like that.
During the movie.
Yeah. And they're both sort of happening at the same time, which is cool.
Yeah. So he has this other, I think after he gets out the elevator, conversation with Cheryl, or maybe she was in the elevator with him. Somehow she knows about the comments. Oh, I know what it is. He goes out of the elevator to get a cup of coffee. He's standing there. The boss throws a paperclip at him to wake him up and says, "Are you out there, Major Tom?" Like he says the Major Tom thing. And so Cheryl says to him, hey, that song that Major Tom that he talked about, that song is about courage and going into the unknown. It's a cool song. Yeah. Basically trying to turn this insult that the boss was saying into a, hey, if he's calling you that, he's saying that he sees, that's he doesn't know what he's talking about because that song is about doing difficult things and stepping out into the unknown, not knowing what's going to happen, but being brave enough to face it. Yeah.
Which is another example of her reaching for connection with him. And I don't know that he doesn't go into fantasy or anything, I think, at that point, but it is, I don't think he can receive it though.
Yeah, but he does go into fantasy. He goes into the Benjamin Button fantasy.
Oh my gosh. Yes. That was so funny.
She like says this nice thing
and
to him.
Also gross.
And then he all of a sudden like just says like, yes, and by the way, I have that weird Benjamin Button. And it's cool because it's like, it's very clear he hasn't seen the movie. He's like, and he even says, I have that weird Benjamin Button disease where like, as I get older, I become a teeny baby old person. I don't really know because I haven't seen it. And they have this like movie trailer montage that ends in the two of them sitting on a porch swing, and she's like in old lady, makeup, her hair's gray, but he is basically a marionette puppet.
It's so
that's
weird.
Teeny, where he has these big Coke bottle glasses, and he's like, my little heart is so filled, it's only the size of a quarter, but I just can't, and then he, I don't know, they're just sitting there clearly having had a happy life. Mm-hmm. But he does slip into that fantasy, and that's the sixth fantasy.
Okay.
And this is all in the first maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes or something.
Oh, yeah, like the first half hour.
So he goes down to his office where he and the one guy that he works with are, and they're trying to track down that negative. The other guy has torn the place up looking for it. He can't find it. So they get the contact sheet, which is basically the negatives that came in the roll. They've put them all on one sheet so they could examine them. And they notice negatives, I think it's 23, 24, and 26. Either that or it's 24, 26, and 27. But the three that are around 25.
Yeah.
They look at those, and they're the only ones that came out decent on the whole roll. So they go, these are our only clues to what we're looking for to try to track down Sean.
Yes. And I think, so I don't know timeline-wise where this happens, but they've had some of those negatives because part of what Cheryl has helped him figure out is that they have seen that there's a word on a ship in one of the pictures.
Yes.
And that word, I don't know if they trace that word or if she traces him, but Greenland comes up. She helps him.
Sure. It's a word or a number. Somehow, by seeing that, they make this connection that Sean, the photographer, is in Greenland.
And I think that's one of the places where they've sent his bill. So he has that connection now.
Yes. So in his officey, warehousey, whatever thing that he's at, he looks over and sees this picture of Sean. This is the seventh fantasy. And Sean in the picture turns and looks at him and begins motioning him to come with his hand, right? So he just leaves immediately for Greenland.
Okay, so pause button right here for a few reasons. One is that I have a question for you. At what point when you first saw this movie do you feel like you saw yourself in him? And has that changed now on rewatching it? Because we've kind of now...
Right. So I don't know the point. I don't remember, if I'm thinking back 8 years ago when it came out, I don't remember that Josh, what point I first saw myself in him.
Okay.
I remember thinking that.
Yeah.
Now, watching it yesterday, when he was trying to leave the wink, I was I remember, wanting to reach out to somebody or make or something and just agonizing over, can I do this? Should I do this? What does this mean? What are they going to say? Just trying to think of the result before taking the action.
Ugh, yes. Which I think we can all identify with, especially in that type of scenario.
Yeah.
Where you're making that first move. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And then the other reason I wanted to pause there is because I'm probably going to come back to this scene several more times. I am a sucker for these scenes where the music swells, the main character makes the decision that you've been wanting them to make, the two people, meet, whatever it is. And he has that moment when he's walking out of the building. Yeah. And the music is swelling and the Life magazine covers, he's
floor to
passing
ceiling
them.
Life covers, a few different ones, but the very last one is a cover of an astronaut and it's him.
As he passes it. Yes. And the music is swelling. And I think, again, I'll come back to this, but it's the first time that he's making a decision to take an action and to do something and to participate in life. Yeah. And it's a cool moment. I'm a sucker for those moments. So I really like it.
It's the first time in the movie. Well, I guess you could argue maybe him calling eHarmony customer service was something like this. Yeah. But it's the first time where he intentionally does something different than what he'd normally do in order to get something that is different than what he normally gets.
Definitely. And I think for me watching that, and I think if anyone's ever had a moment where they feel like they've been going through the motions and you don't feel as in touch with yourself, and then the first time that you do a thing where you kind of reconnect with yourself, is that making sense at all?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's what it gave me a little bit of chills, because I think that's what that moment sort of speaks to.
Absolutely. So he flies to Greenland.
Yes.
And he lands and he gets off the plane, and it's this giant 747, and the airport terminal is this itty bitty tiny cottage looking thing next to the giant 747. And he leaves the plane and he walks up, and itty bitty tiny cottage thing. And then off, I don't know, 50 yards from that, just a one-person booth where you go to get your car. And he walks up to that and he's like, I'd like to rent a car. And the guy says, we have two, a red one and a blue one.
Uh-huh.
And he says, I'll take the red one. And I wish that I could take credit for like spotting this, but I didn't. I saw it in the trivia on IMDb, but it mentioned how that echoes the scene in the first Matrix movie where Morpheus presents Neo with the two pills, a red one and a blue one, and says, if you take the blue one, you wake up, everything's the same. You can pretend like none of this ever happened. But if you take the red one, I'll show you how deep this rabbit hole goes. Mm-hmm. And in that part, Walter says, I'll take the red car because it's this signifier that I don't know if it's a signifier that he has chosen to change, but it's a signifier that he's chosen to go on the journey.
Yes. He's choosing to participate.
Which for him is a big change.
Totally.
Instead of imagining all of this in his head, he's actually doing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So he picks the red car.
He picks the red car, which he drives to a bar that is near where ships and things kind of dock. And he goes into the bar and he's talking to the bartender, basically saying like, hey, do you get mail here? Because this is the address that they had sent the check to.
Right.
And through what seems to be some difficult communication, he learns not only do they get mail there, but it's like a way station where they receive mail and give it to helicopter pilots that take it to ships that are still out at sea.
Right.
And while this is going on, a very large drunk man is performing karaoke on the stage and stumbles over to Walter, basically trying to get him to sing. He kind of says, I'm working. And they get into a real fight. Like, not an imagined fantasy, but the guy breaks one of the big glass boots that you drink beer out of and is holding it over Walter as he has the other hand around his neck, like threatening him. When Walter looks up and sees the guy's hand and realizes that it's the second negative that was a clue. The first was like the ship thing. The second is a picture of a thumb with a thumb ring on it. And he sees it on the pilot.
Yep.
So he begins to talk to him and ask him what's going on and stuff. And the guy basically says, you know, hey, I'm a helicopter pilot. You really should be mindful of who you date when you're in a community that only has 8 people, because I just broke up with somebody and now I feel all alone. That's why he's drunk, is because they had broken up. There's only 8 people there and she was one of the 8. And so he is really sad about it. And so Walter's like, so wait, what are you going to do now? And he's like, well, I'm going to fly this mail to that ship out there. And he's like, you're really drunk. And he goes, yeah, I know. I'm really scared about the weather. And he goes, you want to come with me? And he's like, no, I'm okay.
Which he's also asked everybody if they know Sean. Like, he's actively trying to find Sean, and they do recognize him, and this guy has traveled with Sean, obviously.
Yeah, he's flown him somewhere, he's met him. Right. Yeah, sure. And, so he tells the helicopter pilot, I'm not going to go with you. The guy goes out to his helicopter, and as he's starting it up, Walter, sitting there in the karaoke bar, has the 8th fantasy of the movie, and that is he sees Cheryl walked onto the stage with the 12-string guitar and starts singing and playing Major Tom. And so it's another one of these moments, like you said, that you love. It just starts out kind of like as she's barely strumming the guitar and singing it, and the music starts to build and build and build, and you see Walter have this inspiration, and he just picks up his briefcase and he starts running towards the helicopter. And right as the climax of the song comes up, he jumps to the helicopter, and it's already lifted off the ground up by like a foot or something. Bit. And he jumps and he lands in it, and you can see this look on his face like, I can't believe I just did that. Oh my gosh. And the helicopter pilot's like, hey man, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, kind of thing. And now he's like fully on the thing.
He's fully on the thing.
Yeah, he's all the way in.
So I have a question that is because I know that you're tracking the fantasies, because I wrote down something that I actually am not sure if it's true, but I think it's true. So I think that fantasy, Cheryl strumming the guitar, she kind of like walks him out and then he does the thing. He jumps on the helicopter. I think that that's the last fantasy until no, wait, I'm not done with my sentence. Until he gets back to New York with his mom and sister.
There's one more.
Is it when he's in Greenland, though? I'm not saying the last fantasy period. I'm saying he doesn't have them until he gets back to New York.
Yeah, there's one more in Iceland.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's a teeny one, though.
Okay.
So he's in the helicopter, and I don't want to, like, walk through the whole plot of the whole movie, but he's all the way in to this adventure now.
Yeah.
They fly out to the ship. There's a miscommunication where the helicopter is positioned in such a way where the big ship is on the right. Mm-hmm. Walter doesn't realize that the ship has sent out a little ship that's to the left of the helicopter. Mm-hmm. And the helicopter pilot is delivering these radio parts. And he says, "You're going to have to jump into the boat." And Walter's like, "What? That looks pretty far away. I don't know." And he's like, "You got to go now. You got to go now." He jumps to the right towards the big boat. The helicopter pilot was saying, "No, the little boat to the left that you could land in." He lands in the ocean. Uh-huh. The radio parts go down. Mm-hmm. It looks like his briefcase has air trapped in it, so it takes him up. They rescue him from there after a shark tries to attack him, and he hits the shark with his briefcase. To fend it off. Mm-hmm. They get him inside the boat. So at this point, he went on a spontaneous trip to Greenland. He jumped into and out of a helicopter. Mm-hmm. He fought a shark and won. Mm-hmm. And so now he's talking to these guys on the boat. Mm-hmm. And one of them offers them a piece of cake. It turns out to be Clementine cake. And it turns out to be wrapped in a piece of, I don't know, wax paper or something where Sean had written his itinerary for the next 2 days on it. Mm-hmm. And so he finds this other clue to continue on the journey. The ship was going from Greenland to Iceland. They land in Iceland, and the guy that he was talking to is like, "Hey, you should take the shore bike. There's one bicycle that's leaning up against a pole. You should take the shore bike." And he's like, he's like, "No, man, you need to go now." And he's like, "Why?" He's like, "Because all of these guys that have been cooped up on the boat want to go to the strip club, and there's only one bike." And so all of a sudden he turns over and sees all of the men from the boat running towards the bike. He takes off, gets it, and is on his way. Mm-hmm. While he's riding the bike is the last fantasy that happens before he gets back. He sees this big flock of birds, and the flock of birds take the shape of Cheryl's face.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Okay.
So he sees that. That's the 9th fantasy of the movie. Mm-hmm. And after that happens, some other things happen. Like he ends up coming to a town where he's trying to communicate with these kids because the bike gets broken. Because while he's looking at the birds, he runs into a pole and the bike breaks. So he's trying to trade the Stretch Armstrong for a longboard from one of these kids. By the way, I realized this when we were watching it yesterday. This is why I wanted to get a longboard.
Oh, I thought I knew that from, I think, like the first time that we watched this movie together.
Nice. Yeah. I might have said, but I realized it again yesterday.
Yeah.
Again, but yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
it's a very cool scene when he longboards.
He gets the longboard. A volcano's erupting. He sees Sean on top of a plane.
Heading towards the volcano.
Meanwhile, this other guy is basically yelling at him in Icelandic to get in the car because the volcano's erupted, right? So I had a couple of thoughts during this part. And the first thing I thought was like, oh, this is a little bit like Forrest Gump in that Walter just keeps ending up in these fantastical situations in real life. And it was immediately followed up with this thought of it's the exact opposite of Forrest Gump. Because if you watch Forrest Gump, Forrest never really makes any decisions that have an effect on the world. Forrest is serendipitously present in all of these extremely significant events
Right.
in the life of the United States and history and things like that. And the camera just captures him while
There.
he's there, right? Whereas in Walter's story, he's making decisions every step of the way that gets him to the next step. And that, while I don't know necessarily if it changes the world, it changes him.
Yeah.
Like, he makes decisions that get him to another step in his journey that change him. So he has the thing that he had been wanting in the fantasies at the beginning. He has the ability to influence his world.
Yeah.
And he's doing that.
Yeah. It's a series of him making really active decisions, which I feel like before he was just letting things happen to him. And it's also, I feel like there's so much going on, right? There's like a volcano erupting. He's got to get from one place to the other. He's on a longboard. He's on a bike. He's going down these hills. Like, there's so much happening that it's almost like he has to stay present because there's all these things happening. It's like forcing him to be present in the moment because there's so much adventure and like unknown and new stuff happening that it's like this stuff is not giving him as much of an opportunity to zone out.
Right.
He's fully in it this whole time.
Yeah. So at some point after the volcano erupts, he walks into a Papa John's pizza in the middle of nowhere in Iceland.
Of course.
A Papa John's pizza. And he ends up getting on the phone with Cheryl, and she can kind of tell he's a little distracted or something, and he tells her more of the story of what happened in his life that
his dad.
kind of made him dissociate a little. And it was when he was a kid, previous before he left for the trip, he met Cheryl's son. He had a skateboard. He showed the son that he knew how to skateboard. So you had this guy that's being described as a gray sheet of paper, can do handstands on a skateboard and more than kickflips, like crazy tricks.
Super awesome stuff.
Yeah. But he's telling her he used to be really into skateboarding. There's this picture of him and his dad where he has a mohawk. And she says something like, "Your dad let you get a mohawk?" And he goes, "My dad shaved my head."
Yeah.
And she goes, "What a great dad move." But he tells her that his dad died really suddenly on a Tuesday, and they did not have any savings as a family. So 2 days later on a Thursday, he got a haircut and he got a job at Papa John's. And it was this, like, I've got to put to death the things that are inside of me so that I can help my family. So it's like a death to self and an adoption of duty to go forward. And because his dad's death was so fresh, for him that meant also turning off his feelings and his connection to himself.
Yeah. Yeah. That I think is the moment for me when I realized that's when it was.
Yeah.
Like, that's when he turned off. It also makes me wonder, again, just the theme of this movie speaking to you a lot. You talked about kind of those teenage years when your parents split up, having a lot going on inside of you, but not knowing how to deal with it. And so feeling disconnected from yourself. And I wondered if, maybe that's a connection too with you and Walter Mitty. Like, he had something traumatic happen in his dad's death. You had something traumatic happen in your parents splitting up. For any child, that's a, traumatic
Yes, and while
thing.
we didn't have the types of money problems that it sounds like Walter and his family had, he had a message inside of him that was, for the good of the family, I've got to kill me, not literally, but I've got to put to death what's inside of me and disconnect from my grief so that I can get a job and earn money to help. For me, at that time, it was like, I know that my family is going through a lot. I don't want to add to the pile.
Yeah.
So whatever's happening inside of me, I've got to turn it off so that they don't have to deal with that too.
Yep. And I think that is, as much as, he does talk about the money and getting a job, I think that is kind of the same thing that happens to him. Like, he's got to turn off the grief because he's got to just keep going. And he turns off all those things that it sounds like his dad encouraged in him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he gets back to the States.
Mm-hmm.
And
because he's reached kind of a dead end. He
he's
doesn't
reached
know where to find Sean. There's no more clues.
Yeah.
Basically, he's reached a dead end.
Right. So he goes back. He is on the street and he sees some of his coworkers coming out, packed up. He's talking to them, and the boss and his two cronies come up. You got that picture? You got that picture? And he says, no. He fires him on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then he stands up to his boss, basically saying, like, you know, hey, do you know what this magazine's about? Do you know, he stands up instead of freezing and dissociating, basically to say, like, hey, you're being really heartless and you don't even really realize why everybody did what they did here at this magazine. And from there, he goes to visit with his sister and his mom. Mm-hmm. They are packing up the place still. As he's sitting there, he takes out the wallet that he had gotten from Sean. He takes out a few things from it and just chunks it in the trash. And he kind of flops on the couch. He's holding the 3 pictures that he had. And he realizes that the last picture, that's not the water with the boat edge and the thumb, it's this weird, like, kind of abstract series of lines. But as he's sitting there, he realizes that it's the edge of his mom's piano.
Yeah.
Sean had been at his mom's house. Mm-hmm. And so he asks his mom, and he's like, oh, yeah, like, he was here. I gave him some of the cake, like, and all of this. And so he kind of realizes where, and she's like, yeah, and he mentioned he was going to something about warlords. And so that, like, tells Walter where to go next.
He needed the cake for the warlords.
Yes. So he ends up going to, like, where the Himalayas are, which I couldn't tell you where those are in real life, but.
Which there's a small moment that I want to touch on with his mom, because he goes into a fantasy again at some point when he's at his mom's, I thought.
It's in the cab on the way there.
That's when
He's in the cab, and in the cab is a television screen where it's showing Conan O'Brien, and all of a sudden the fantasy is he's the guest on Conan O'Brien, and Conan and Andy are laughing and like, oh my gosh, you're so great. Like, tell us that story again, blah, blah, blah. And then Conan says something about his dad, or like something makes him snap out of the fantasy.
Yes.
And it's enough to where he doesn't even want to continue to watch it. So he asks, can you turn this off? And when the cabbie can't, he says, well, just let me out here and I'll walk.
Yes. Okay. And then when he's at his mom's, here's what I was thinking of. He realizes that Sean was at his mom's, and he's like, Mom, why didn't you say something? Like, how did I not know? And his mom tells him, I did. You were in one of your fantasies.
Yeah.
That's what I wrote down about him being at his mom's, is that he has this realization that while he was zoned out in fantasy, he missed something that was,
which I think is
super important.
His first time of realizing he's missing something when he zones out. And I also, like, I have been tracking the fantasies.
Yes.
The one that he has in the cab on the way to Mom's house is the last one of the movie. There's no fantasies after that. Yeah.
So he has a fantasy, then he realizes how much he misses in fantasy.
He had another one at his mom's, apparently. Or maybe not. Maybe she's saying, I told you that at some time before right now.
That's what it was.
Yes.
They were in the grocery store. And then she kind of says to his sister, what do you call it when he does that?
Yeah. So he learns what he needs to learn, and he goes to wherever it is, the Himalayas. He hires some Sherpas. They get up the mountain, and he finds Sean, right? And something I wrote down before that was, once he realizes this last picture is his mom's piano, that he's only able to spot the clues and follow them if he stays out of his fantasies and is fully present in the moment. And what you just said, where he was like, Mom, why didn't you? And she said, oh, I did, but you zoned out. That's kind of him connecting that, oh, shoot, I've got to be here to get life.
Yeah, he's missing life while he's in fantasy.
So he tracks all the way up this mountain. At some point, as he's up the mountain, he gets a call from Todd with eHarmony, which he's been connecting with all along the way. And at some point, he was like, hey, the part of the profile that's, noteworthy or mentionable, he's like, well, I jumped out of a helicopter. I fought a shark. It's like, what? And so Todd calls him and is like, man, your profile's getting a lot of action. Like, this is great. And he goes, hey, man, I got to talk to you later. I've got to make oxygen choices, because he's up in the Himalayas. And so while he's up there, he just is walking, and he looks over, and there's Sean under a blanket behind a camera. And he goes up and talks to him and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm waiting on, there's a snow leopard in that clearing."
Mm-hmm.
They call it a ghost cat because they never let themselves be seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote down that, like, Walter has this realization in the moment that this guy that he has quote unquote worked with for so long and admired as the epitome of what life could be.
Mm-hmm.
He's there with him. And the guy that he had admired is doing this thing that is the ultimate, you've got to be present in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's an animal that, like, its whole purpose is to not be seen. So if you're not looking, there's no way that you'll see it. And Walter is here with the guy that exemplifies it, doing the thing that exemplifies it. It's like Walter's ultimate moment.
Mm-hmm.
And as he's like sitting there and he's talking about it, and he's like, "Hey, yeah, you sent me these negatives, but it was missing the thing." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I put it in the wallet." And he's like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, I put the negative in the wallet. I thought it'd be cute."
He says, "I thought it'd be cute."
And Walter's like, "Oh, I threw the wallet away." And he goes, "Oh, well, that hurts my feelings." Which, I mean, I think even in that moment, you have Sean Penn playing this guy that Walter perceives as the ultimate tough guy adventurer.
Mm-hmm.
So for the ultimate tough guy adventurer to say that hurts my feelings,
Totally.
I think is this beautiful connection between, you know, this toxic masculinity model that's out in the world. You can be a guy that's out in nature and is like fully connected to the moment and doing adventurous things, and also have feelings that you're intimately connected with.
Yeah.
And that you express to others that you care about.
And I would even say, like, a person who is out in the world, and I forget all the things that you just said, but basically, like, the traditional understanding of, like, a man's man, like, outdoorsy guy, if you're all of those things but you can't connect with yourself and your emotions, then you're not fully present. Like,
Right.
And Walter's a great example of, if you're not connected to yourself and your emotions, you can't be fully present in life. You can't process it.
So as they're sitting there talking, Sean like shushes him
Mm-hmm.
because the snow leopard walks out.
Mm-hmm.
And he's looking at it through this big telescopic lens that he has, and he lets Walter lean over and look at it. And Sean says this thing, beautiful things don't ask for attention.
Yeah.
And as they're looking at it, Walter says to him, "When are you going to take it, the picture?
Yeah.
When are you going to take it?" And then Sean says, "Sometimes I don't. If I like a moment, for me personally, I don't like to have the distraction of the camera. I just want to stay in it."
Yeah.
And Walter says, "Stay in it." And he said, "Yeah, right there." And then he takes his hand and touches it to his chest, like right here.
Mm.
And so this once in a lifetime opportunity to get a picture of a snow leopard,
Mm-hmm.
Sean doesn't take the picture. They see past where the leopard is on the ground in like a valley. This group of kids is playing soccer, and Sean just goes, "That looks fun. I want to go do that." And gets up,
Mm-hmm.
starts packing, and just they go down and they play soccer. They never get the picture, but they have the moment.
Right.
So Walter leaves to go back home.
Mm-hmm.
He ends up landing in L.A. He gets seized at the airport because he was hiding a flute as he went through the x-ray machine. They arrest him. They say, "We need somebody that can identify who you are. Do you know anybody in L.A.?" And the only person he knows is Todd from eHarmony. So he calls him. He comes down to the airport, verifies his identity. They release him to Todd, and he gets to sit down and talk with this guy that he's been on the phone with for the whole movie.
Off and on while he's been doing these adventures.
And Todd asks him, "Hey, man, how's the daydreaming going?" And he just goes, "Lately, less." And Todd goes, "Good. Less is good." You know, and at this point, you kind of see that as Walter began to participate actively in connecting with his own life, the fantasies lessened.
Yeah.
Until there is no more fantasy, because he no longer needs the fantasies because he's living.
And something else too that I think is cool about this scene with Todd, and I think we see it again in a few minutes with another scene with his mom, is that as he's doing all these things you're saying, like his fantasies are lessening, he's more present in life. He's also meeting people and realizing that there's been people who have been pulling for him.
Yeah.
Because I think even Todd, as much as he's only been present for this small bit of time, you know, Todd has kind of been like, you got to get out there and do things. Like, what have you done?
Cheering him on.
He's been rooting for him. Like, he's been wanting his profile to get stuff. And so then Walter Mitty has this moment of sitting with him in the Cinnabon, whatever place. And Todd even asking him, like, how's that going? Oh, that's good. You know? And there's another moment like that later where, and even meeting Sean is like that. Sean's a person who has considered Walter a friend and somebody who Sean, I think, looks up to and values. Yeah. And so I think Walter has, as he's become more present and connected with himself, he's also been able to receive and accept, like, and see, oh, there's people in my life. Like, I have people.
So, like, one of the reasons why I love this movie so much, and this was really something that I was able to connect and piece together yesterday when we watched it, was I think that for a person to achieve what I would call wholeness in life, like a life that they embrace and is satisfying and that feels full, I think that person has to pursue being actively connected to themselves. I think until they become actively connected to themselves, they can't get to this next level, which is actively pursuing active connection with others. And I think one thing that helps them do both of those is pursuing active connection with a higher power or a sense of purpose. And so at this point, like you're saying, because Walter has been pursuing and welcoming and sitting in this connection to himself, much like picking the red car, he's becoming awake to the connections that others around him have been trying to have with him. Whereas before he couldn't. He was so busy wishing for what he believed life would give him. He was missing out on what life was actually giving him. And so he meets with Todd. He goes back to New York. He's helping his mom and sister pack up their place. One thing that they need to do before they can move his mom into wherever they're going to move her to is there's a piano in mom's house that their dad had bought for their mom. It's very precious. And at this point, it kind of symbolizes Walter not dealing with his dad's death, because up until this point, he has not wanted to sell the piano. His mom's been okay with it. His sister's been okay with it. He has not been okay with it.
But he thinks he's been doing it for his mom. He says, like...
Right. No, this means too much to you. Like,
Dad gave it to you.
Right, yeah. But the mom's like, no, it's okay. It's okay. So they finally sell the piano. The salesperson, clerk, whatever, gives him the check for it. And it's a really big check. And him and his mom are hugging, and his sister comes up and hugs him. And his mom says, hey, that check is pretty big. You should put it in your wallet. And he says, oh, I don't have a wallet. I got rid of it. And she pulls the wallet out from her purse and says that he threw it away, but she had saved it. And she gives him the wallet, and he opens it up, and the negative is inside the wallet. So he immediately takes it to the office, gives it over to the people, like asks the boss guy if he knows what the motto of the magazine is. And he says, life, I'm loving it. And he says, no, that's McDonald's. And he says the motto of the magazine. And so then he exits the building, and there's like a little passage of time or something. And we join him and Cheryl having this conversation where they meet up. And at some point in there, I think when he had come back, he had the longboard that really he had gotten because he wanted to give it to Cheryl's kid.
Yeah.
He goes to her place, knocks on the door. A guy answers it. And he thinks it's her ex-husband that she's gotten back together with. That's the story he tells himself. So he kind of like withdraws, gives the skateboard to that guy to give to the kid.
Doesn't really call Cheryl anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
So he meets up with Cheryl, and she's like, oh, no, that guy was just there to repair my refrigerator. And by the way, like, my kid really appreciated the skateboard. Thank you so much. So as they're talking, he invites her he says, hey, my sister's going to be in this production of Grease at this church that's somewhere else in the city, whatever. Would you want to go with me? And she's like, oh my gosh, a production of Grease at a weird church in this weird part of town. Like, of course I'd want to go. And it's this moment where the moment at the beginning of the movie where he's hovering over the wink button, not knowing whether or not to do this thing that would express interest in another person. Without thinking in that moment, he just asks her out.
Right.
And
he's vulnerable. I think that's a moment of like,
I think it's vulnerability, but I also think he's so connected to himself in that moment that he realizes if she were to say no, it's not the death of him. He's okay.
Which is why he can take the risk and ask, whereas before, even taking the risk to press a button was so much.
Yeah, yeah. So he like asks her out, and as they're walking, they're like, oh, the last issue of the magazine's out. And so they walk over to a newsstand and they see it. The cover of the magazine, -25, the picture that's Sean's best work that exemplifies the quintessence of life. And it's a picture he took of Walter sitting at the edge of a fountain, holding up a contact page of negatives, looking up at it. And it's this weird infinity connection circle moment where this whole time...
Infinity connection circle moment.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. This whole time, Walter had been looking to Sean as an example of what life should be.
Yes.
And in this moment, you realize that Sean had been looking at Walter as an example of what life should be.
Yep.
And him and Cheryl are still having this conversation, and he tells her that he was thinking of her on his travels. And he says, at one point, he's talking about being in Iceland in the bar, and he says, I started to imagine you singing Major Tom, and it got me on the helicopter. And so it's not even that he's showing up and being present in the moment, but he's actually telling her, which I think is an act of vulnerability farther than asking her out, that I was thinking of you while I was gone. And when we watched it yesterday, I'd probably seen the movie before this 5 times, 4 times, something like that.
Right.
This is the first time I caught this entire conversation between him and Cheryl, the way the camera is, except for the two of them, everything in the background is bokeh'd. It's all blurry. The only things in focus are the two of them. And it's this beautiful symbolism that he has finally integrated. His person, his self, is no longer time traveling. It's no longer in fantasy. It's finally in the moment. And everything about that moment to him is crystal clear.
Right.
And he's finally arrived.
Present.
He's finally present. Yeah.
I think that's really beautiful. And there's one other thing that happens that just kind of similar to what you're saying, where it's one way in the beginning of the movie and it's another way in the end of the movie. At the beginning of the movie, I think it's showing him leaving work, could be walking in, I'm not sure. But he's moving slower than everybody around him. It shows and we'll go back and I'll show you, but there's this scene where you see people walking around him and everybody's moving at a faster pace than him. He's like moving in slow motion. And at the end of the movie, it seems like everybody's moving kind of slow, but he's the same pace as everyone else. And for me, that's something that I noticed that I think is the same thing. It's illustrating the same thing as what you're talking about. Like, he's finally here. He's finally in the moment. He's not absent from life. He's experiencing it, which is really cool.
Yeah. So, like, to me, this movie, its story, its character, when it came out and when I saw it, felt like the work that I was doing inside of me put up on a screen. Yeah. Because when I came back to South Carolina, I felt like a failure.
Yeah.
And I didn't like my life, and I was disconnected from myself, and I had no idea, A, that anything was wrong, Which it's not like something was wrong, but I didn't know that life could be any different.
Mm-hmm.
And then B, at some point I realized I don't know if life can be different, but I want it to be, and I don't know how to make it.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to therapy. And so C, through therapy, it helped me connect with me.
Mm-hmm.
And in that process, I found a new career. I fell in love with the person who helped me open every morning at Starbucks. And
It's me.
I took steps that were way outside my comfort zone that I'd never do. I had been out of school for 13 years and decided to go back to grad school, scared to death that I had forgotten how to learn, not knowing how to format research articles in the APA style of formatting, and having never packed up and all my stuff moved to a new city with people I'd never met. I jumped into the helicopter and went, and by connecting with myself, it allowed me to connect with other people, allowed me to connect with you, and it gave me a purpose in life. And I have a life that I always wanted because I got out of my head and stopped imagining what that life would be, and I started living it.
Yeah.
And that's why I love this movie.
Yeah, I was going to ask you at one point, do you have a different, is it different watching it now than when you maybe first watched it in 2013, or when you were first kind of starting your journey? And what I just heard you say was maybe when you first watched it, it was like, yeah, this is what I'm doing. Like, that's what I want to aim for.
No, yes. When I first watched it, it was like headlights through fog.
Yes. And then now, though, watching it, maybe it's more of a like, yeah, that's what I got. Like,
Yeah.
I did it.
Now it's like looking at the subway map in New York where I can see the beginning and I can see the end and I can see every stop along the way. And that's not to say that my journey's through, but that's just to say that from this point of the journey back, I can see how I got here. I had a therapist tell me one time, oh, you don't know your own story. And I remember being mad at the time, like, well, who in the world are you to tell me I don't know? And I look back now and I go, oh, no, I didn't know my own story. Because I had tried so hard to not live it. I had actively tried to not live my own story. And because I went to therapy, I learned how to live it.
Yeah.
And it gave me more than what I wanted. It gave me things I could have never imagined needing. And it helped make me who I am.
So everyone, you should probably go talk to someone. I'm just kidding.
That's a good callback. I like that.
Thank you. Okay, so I have one more question before we go into the wrap-up questions. You can edit this out if it's too long. But I do want to know, what if you had to pick your favorite scene of that whole movie? Because it's got a lot of good scenes. What do you think your favorite scene in that whole movie would be? I'll go ahead and tell you mine is when he's leaving the office, and it's that moment of the music swelling.
That's not bad.
Thank
One
you.
great thing about that scene too, though, is that the motto of life is on all these different places in the background as he's going.
I know.
That's pretty great.
It's the best.
I love the scene where he jumps on the helicopter.
Yeah.
That's pretty great. I love the scene where they see the snow leopard. Something hit yesterday, something about when they sell the piano and his mom gives him the wallet and he didn't know she had saved it. Something about that hit yesterday in a way it hadn't hit before.
Yeah.
And I think it was because, so I'm going to just go ahead and say that one, although I've got a million favorite scenes in it, because I think one thing that hit me on yesterday was when you show up connected to yourself, I think you'll be surprised at how others can be there for you. Because one of the reasons why Walter slips into fantasy is because he doesn't trust that others will meet his needs. So he seeks to meet his own needs through the fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And when he finally shows up, he's surprised that mom, in the best way, that mom showed up for him. When the truth is, mom's been showing up for him the whole time.
Yes.
He just couldn't see it.
Well, something else happens in that scene where he apologizes to his mom. He says, I'm sorry, because they're selling the piano. He goes, I'm so sorry. Like, Dad got you this. This was my responsibility. And her response is, we're okay. Like, we're grown-ups. We're fine. We're okay. Almost saying, like, this wasn't your responsibility and you didn't need to take care of us. And so kind of what you were just saying, like, he doesn't trust other people to meet his own needs. He also, I don't think in some ways, he's not looking at other people as agents over their own life. Like especially his mom and his sister. I think
well, because when his dad died and he had to step out of himself, it hit the pause button on his emotional development because he was unable to process and engage with his own grief. He was also unable to see or experience how his mother and sister were doing the same.
Yes.
So the only message that he operated on, as far as his family goes, after that was, I've got to take care of them.
Yes. And it's a good example, though, of what you were just saying. Like because of all of that, he couldn't, I guess, experience them as like being able to care for him, as like being in an actual relationship with them. Because he just felt like he needed to just take care of business and turn off and not be himself and not be a full person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we do the wrap up things too. So like when I first saw this movie, I went full tilt fan. I got the soundtrack. Like I loved it. And the soundtrack's incredible. I mean, partway because Major Tom's on it, or Space Oddity is what it's actually called. Also the Pina Colada song, although the one on the soundtrack is a Jack Johnson version, which is still pretty great. But there's several songs on it by a guy named Jose Gonzalez.
Oh, yeah.
And in the movie, there's this music cue that keeps happening. And that got me a little bit yesterday in the way that when we were watching About Time, I kept recognizing this music cue and I couldn't place it. That one was like, once I finally placed it, I just ugly cried forever. This one wasn't the same. It was just I finally got it. The Jose Gonzalez song on the soundtrack that's number one is the one that is, let's see, I think it's the one that's playing when he's leaving the office to go to Greenland.
Okay.
And there's a line in it that is, house on fire, leave it all behind you. And then there's another Jose Gonzalez song that's like number 4 on the soundtrack, and I can't remember where it's at in the movie, where the line is, do anything just to stay alive. And so in 2013, when this came out, those two lyrics became motivators to me. And at one point, I was even talking about getting one of them tattooed on me. But they became motivators to me of embracing life and doing anything just to stay alive, not in a like survival instinct kind of way, but just in a valuing connection with myself more.
Yeah.
That would give me motivation to pursue life instead of staying in my head and imagining what life could be.
Wow. Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
Boom.
Secret Life of Josh Treece. So, Josh, now that we're at the wrap-up portion of our show today, I'd love to ask you a couple questions about your therapy and your clients. You ready?
Sure.
So, in the theme of being present in your life and being you and living fully in the moment, can you share with us some things that you do to take care of yourself and to be more present in life?
Yeah. So I think that self-care has always been something that I have not been great at. Mainly because as a person who was divorced from himself, it's when you don't know yourself, you don't know how to take care of yourself. So in my journey of actively connecting with myself, the more I learn about me, the more I can care for me. And so at some point last year, in the pandemic, I realized, oh man, I am not really loving doing counseling right now. I feel burnt out. And I really wrestled with that for a few days and was talking with you about it and realized that I'm not caring for myself in a way that's making life sustainable right now. How do I do that? And my answer was to be more intentional with how I spent my days rather than just getting up, turning the TV on, and only turning it off when I had sessions. Which I feel like all of us during the pandemic have felt just a malaise wash over us, you know. So I did this audit of my time where I realized what I was giving to autopilot, what I was giving to intention, and decided things. I made a set of value statements for how I want to spend my time. Instead of trying to make a schedule, I tried to decide how do I want to value my time and how do I want to show what I care about in my life by doing it. So that's one way. Another way was I had a goal this month of meditating every day. So far I've met that goal 2 out of 3 times. But doing that and just continuing, I think one thing of self-care for me for the rest of my life, and what may just be a natural thing for most people, is to let the inside stuff out. Because I think for me, I can get stuck in my head about anything and everything. So to talk to you about what my thoughts are, my feelings are, and not because, well, we're married and that's what you do, but as a self-care practice of realizing when you keep all the stuff in, it's not as real.
Yeah.
And it becomes real by letting it out.
And I think that's a good, I think relationships can be self-care, like when you're actively participating in them and when it's, a mutual support system. I think it can be that. Well, now that we're wrapping up, let's take a couple minutes to talk about your therapy practice and what you do. So what's something that your clients have taught you? What's something you've learned from them?
So I say it to sum up what other people have said on the show about this, but it's really tough to sit with people and not be inspired by them in therapy. So I think that one thing that if I want to break down that inspiration into something else, it's that they show up for the most part open. They don't show up with something in mind saying, well, I'm at point A, I got to get to point B, so we got to hit point C, so we got to hit point B here in the session today. They show up going, this is what's happening inside of me, and then they're willing to explore for the most part.
Yeah.
And I think that, much like in the movie where Walter finally is able to show up and be present in the moment and see where the moment takes him, my clients inspire me to be in the moment and see where the moment takes you. Instead of starting a session going, today we're going to talk about X and we're going to end on Y, and next week we're going to be at Z. I think that with some goals that my clients have, you need a bit of that. But you also need the ability to just see where the day and the moment takes you. And so they inspire me to do that.
Yeah. That's almost a cool way of even being present, like being able to be present and flexible in the moment and not necessarily doing things how you think they should be done.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, let's say somebody's listening to us today and they would like
for the last
see
time.
You. Yeah. And they'd like to see you as a therapist. Hopefully you've listened to more episodes. I would encourage you to do that. But, let's say someone hears this, they want you to be their therapist, they want to be your client. How could they get in touch with you?
Well, I think the easiest way is to go to my website, www.joshtreece.com. JOSHTREECE.com. And from there, you can link to my practice website, read about what I've got going on, and reach out through the website, and we can get started.
Cool. Well, thanks for being here today, Josh.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Hey, everybody. Well, there you have it. The last interview of the podcast form of Therapist Theater. I wanted to hand the reins over to Leigh-Ann and sit in the guest's chair so that I could maybe give you guys a glimpse into why I have a passion for therapy and therapy education, and how that passion ties into movies. Oh, and since neither of us could remember it while we were talking, Life Magazine's motto is, to see the world, things dangerous to come to see behind walls, draw closer, to find each other, and to feel. That is the purpose of life. As I said last week, this isn't the end of Therapist Theater. It's just an evolution. Head over to YouTube and search Therapist Theater and subscribe so you can follow along as video content starts to come out. Oh, and as always, the best way to keep up is to follow the socials. I've said the phrase, I've got a bad case of being a person, a ton on the show. That phrase has a special meaning to me. It, like The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, symbolizes a chapter break. There was a time in my life when I thought that the feelings I tried to keep locked up inside me made me different than others. I thought they meant I was messed up and broken. But through learning how to tune into them, while also learning how to be brave and vulnerable and connect with others, I found out that I wasn't alone. I was afraid I was the only one, but I found out I was actually being human. I found out I had a bad case of being a person. To me, that phrase normalizes, validates, and unifies because it tells me that it's okay to talk about what my interior life is like because it's also what everyone else's is like. It's my sincere hope that this show, in its current form, has helped you realize that you're not broken. You're not the only one. You're in an inclusive club of about 7.8 billion other people. And it's in realizing that you've got a bad case of being a person and choosing to be vulnerable with others that you can experience the magic of healthy intimacy. I just want to say thanks to every guest that allowed me to speak with them. I learned so much from you, and you've made my life fuller and better. Thank you to every one of you that's listened. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for supporting the show. And most of all, thank you to my wife, Leigh-Ann. You've helped me see the value in what a shared open life can be more than any other human. I love each and every one of you with my whole heart, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do about it. So, for the last time, let's raise the lights, lower the curtain. The theater is closed.